Money isn't all that matters. Poverty is defined by the capabilities approach.
You're tasked with choosing what face to put on a textbook about poverty studies. What face do you choose? Would it be a middle-aged black woman? Because 24.2% of all black people in the U.S. are in poverty, according to Daniel Meyer and Jeffrey Wallace in their book Changing Poverty, Changing Policies? Or would you choose a white child? Because 17.4% of children in the U.S. are impoverished, and 42.2% of those in poverty in the U.S. are white? An elderly Hispanic man, perhaps? Because the average income gap for Hispanics in poverty is almost $9,000.
This is a difficult question because you cannot put a face to poverty. You cannot determine whether or not a person is living in poverty simply by looking at him or her.
So what is poverty, and who does it affect? And why is it important for us to know the answers to any of these questions?
In this presentation, we will attempt to define the ambiguous term poverty and decide how it is best measured. Wrestling with the complexities of poverty and debating how it can be best measured are essential first steps to eventually figuring out what we can do about it.
What most people talk about when they talk about poverty is income lowness, or to put it more accurately, income inadequacy. If you are poor in the economical sense, you are living in poverty. But what if it's more than that? What if a person has enough money but is not able to vote in his community? Would you consider that person impoverished? Monetary deprivation is undoubtedly a big part of poverty, but it alone does not paint a complete picture.
Some might say poverty refers to not having enough. Well, enough of what? Sure, poverty might be an economic reality, but it also might be affected by cultural and social surroundings as well. Perhaps poverty has different definitions depending on what you're talking about.
We believe poverty to be capability failure due to social or natural injustices. But that sounds a bit confusing. So what does it mean?
Capabilities, as defined by Amartya Sen in his book The Quality of Life, are the combinations of things a person is able to do or be, the various functionings he or she can achieve.
To put it simply, functionings are what a person is actually being or doing. And capabilities are the things a person has the potential to be or do. Functionings can be as simple as being adequately nourished and in good health, or more complex, such as being socially integrated. The capabilities approach to poverty is therefore built on the idea that poverty occurs when people lack the opportunity to live their lives as they please or as would be considered socially acceptable.
What about a person who has enough food to feed himself but chooses not to because he's fasting for religious purposes, however? Would he be considered to be living in poverty? No, because although he does not exercise the functioning of eating, he has the capability to do so if he so chooses.
When defining poverty, we therefore should not care about money except as a means to these functionings and capabilities. People should have the opportunity to turn a capability into a functioning if they desire to do so. But poverty is what gets in the way of doing so. A person is in poverty if his or her capabilities fail in comparison to a certain threshold.
What is this threshold, and how is it measured?
Today, the U.S. measures poverty using the Official Poverty Measurement, or the OPM. This measurement was created by Molly Orshansky in 1964 and uses a poverty line, or threshold, to determine if someone is poor or not. To create this threshold, Orshansky multiplied the minimum food diet by 3 due to the fact that at that time, food made up 1/3 of a household's budget. A household's gross annual pre-tax income is then compared to this threshold. If a household is above the threshold, they are considered not poor, and if they are below, they are considered poor.
Overall, this threshold is outdated. Sure, when Orshansky created the threshold, food accounted for 1/3 of a household's budget, but that is no longer the case today. Due to the fact that food is now less expensive and other expenses such as rent take up a bigger portion of the average budget, the number today is closer to 1/6 or even 1/10. However, the OPM does not adjust to account for this change.
Additionally, the OPM threshold does not adjust for the cost of living, geographic location, or household makeup. So two families, one living in New York City and the other in rural Idaho, are compared to the same threshold, even though the cost of living in New York City is much higher. The OPM also does not capture non-discretionary expenses, such as transportation costs necessary to earn income or important medical costs.
Lastly, the OPM does not take into consideration in-kind benefits such as the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, and WIC, which is SNAP for women with infants or children, or near-cash benefits such as Earned Income Tax Credits, or EITC. The reason for this is simply because these benefits did not exist when our Shanty created the threshold.
So, what does all this mean? Consider this situation. The OPM threshold is $12,000. If a man makes $13,000, is he considered poor? According to the OPM, no. And if a single woman makes $11,000, she is considered poor according to the OPM. However, let's say this woman receives $2,000 in benefits, and this man has a medical disorder that costs him $2,000 in medical expenses. This man is still considered not poor by the OPM, even though he only has $11,000 in usable income. On the other hand, the woman is considered poor even though she makes $13,000 after factoring government benefits.
To address some of the shortcomings of the OPM, the Census Bureau now releases a supplemental poverty measure, or the SPM. The SPM redefines the poverty threshold and modernizes it. For starters, it replaces the food times 3 measurement with a measurement that more accurately represents a household budget. Instead, the SPM identifies the spending on food, clothing, shelter, and utilities, noted here as FCSU. Of the house in the 33rd percentile in the U.S., the multiples this figure by 1.2 to cover any minor additional expenses. One is considered poor if they have less money than this number and not poor if they land above this line. Instead of using gross annual pre-tax income, the SPM uses the GAPTI after non-discretionary expenses, as well as in-kind and near-cash benefits have been accounted for. The SPM also adjusts for geographic location, price of living, and modern familial configuration.
In the example with the man and the woman, if we still make the assumption that the threshold is $12,000, with the SPM, the man is making $13,000, but forfeiting $2,000 in medical expenses would be considered poor, while the woman making $11,000 but receiving $2,000 in government benefits would not be considered poor. Thus, not all people considered poor in the OPM are poor in the SPM, and vice versa.
There are certainly benefits of keeping track of poverty levels via both the official poverty measurement and the supplemental poverty measurement. However, because the OPM is so outdated, the SPM is a more reliable measurement.
Now that we have wrestled with the concept of poverty, ultimately defined it as capability failure due to social or natural injustices, and decided it is best measured by the supplemental poverty measure, we can start debating the most important question: what can we do?